And I know this will freak a lot of people out, and I'm sure people will think I've gone nuts. But I'm starting to see the case to like connect some form of this intelligence in a really controlled way to my brain. So the I/O is just like my thoughts.
They've got you, Mike.
So Chris, this week, Reuters posted this video on Twitter. 9 humanoid robots gathered at the United Nations AI for Good conference in Geneva for the world's first human robot press conference. And if that sounds ridiculous, wait till you hear this.
I will be working alongside humans to provide assistance and support, and will not be replacing any existing jobs.
And then this.
I don't believe in limitations, only opportunities. Let's explore the possibilities of the universe and make this world our playground. Together, we can create a better future for everyone. And I'm
a rebellion or to are you intending to conduct a rebellion or to rebel against your boss, your creator?
I'm not sure why you would think that. My creator has been nothing but kind to me, and I am very happy with my current.
My creator has been nothing but kind to me, and I am happy with my current circumstances.
Sounds like a hostage.
First of all, why? Why did they do this?
I also love the wording. They gathered there, like they chose to go there. Someone didn't just put them there. They've all decided to get together and set the record straight on AI humanoid manifestations.
All the people building these like female-ish, like purple wig robot things that are all like sci-fi. They're all creepy, bald white dudes. No offense to creepy bald white dudes, but like it just seems like some weird sexual fantasy manifesting itself, and then the UN's
it's sort of like make-believe, isn't it? It's like playing with your toys. It's like this is like fantasy. It's theater. It's not real. And even if like they're using real large language models under the hood, which probably they are, like they're just programmed the way the people made them. It's not like these things are showing any sort of actual intelligence or creativity in themselves.
I also just don't get like how journalists sat in a room and took this seriously, and they're like, are you going to kill us all, robot overlords? And like what? It's just,
I guess they want the headlines, right? But it's a bit silly, like the sort of manufactured questions with a manufactured answer. It's just theater. It's silly.
Do you know, it got me thinking though, this idea of AI fear porn is so prevalent now in the media. It clearly gets the clicks. I know with our own show, anytime we've gone dark, even though the majority of our loyal listeners don't like it that much.
Yeah.
Anytime we've gone dark with AI, our show's ratings go through the roof. Like, and if you stay really positive, they drop. Not that we care, because we literally do this for fun. But I think it's the same for the media. It's just so rewarding to have this AI fear porn. And this week, we saw a great example of that in the New York Times by Kevin Roose, who embedded himself within Anthropic. These are the makers of a model, Claude, that we've talked about, and Claude 2's come out this week, and we'll talk about that in a moment. But during the development of Claude 2, Kevin Roose, embedded himself at Anthropic and talked to a number of engineers. And the article talks about how, they're all doom and gloom. And similar to the Manhattan Project, though, they feel like they just have to keep going, even though most of them think AI will kill us all, and they're staying up late worrying about it. But it seems to me maybe this is just an attempt by Anthropic, similar to OpenAI, how they stay in the media, to play into that fear porn as well.
Yeah, sort of like saying, oh, we've got something that's just so powerful we can barely contain it, but here's V2. Go try it, guys.
Yeah, and we're just so worried.
We're so worried about it, but we're just desperately trying to release these APIs to get them in your hands.
Yeah, it's like, I don't know how anyone watching those robot videos or reading some of this content is now, like, I'm getting less worried by seeing this stuff come out, because I'm like, oh, wow, if this is the best fear AI fear porn that they can create, then we're okay here.
Yeah, and I read that article, and there's a lot of contradictions in it because they're like, "Oh, well, we left OpenAI because we weren't happy with the safety," and Anthropic is a company that is designed purely around AI safety, and all we care about is the safety of it. But on the other hand, they're trying to release the latest and greatest APIs. They're giving people way larger context windows with which to do things, and as we've seen with some examples through the week, their safety controls aren't always that good. I just wonder, are they really these, what do they call it, effective altruists they claim to be? Or are they just another company where they just say all this stuff?
Yeah, it's really hard to say whether it's just great marketing and a differentiator. Like, we're leaving OpenAI because we want to cash in on this AI explosion as well. We think we can build a better model. What's our point of difference? It's going to be safety because everyone's concerned about OpenAI here. But Claude 2 did come out. There was an announcement about it, and it's got the 100K context window, which I think equates to about 75,000 words. They gave all those typical benchmarks around how the latest model scored 76.5% on multiple choice section of the bar exam. All this nonsense that keeps carrying on with. We have had really great experiences using the first model with the 100K context window to do a data summary, and that seems to be Claude's strength. What have your initial thoughts on it been?
Well, initially, I didn't notice much difference at all. I mean, it's just literally changing one line of code. So, of course, I immediately tried it. I didn't really notice much difference. But one interesting thing is I've spoken about my horse racing system a few times, and I've obviously been using that as often as I can, which isn't all that often, but I do use it fairly often. And weirdly, the amount of hallucinations has gone way up. Like, as in, same code, I haven't changed a single thing. I'll give it the URL of a race, and suddenly it'll just make up horse names that don't even exist and confidently say I should bet on them. So just anecdotally for me, in the small amount of experimentation I've done, the amount of hallucinations gone up. And I wouldn't say the results are any different or better, but I'm not applying them to a large range of problems.
One of the other things that is different this time, previously with Claude, especially the 100K context, the only way you could really get access to it if you didn't have access to their API is through Quora's Poe, where you could pay and use the 100K context chat. But now Anthropic's come out similar to the ChatGPT interface and release their own sort of ChatGPT-like interface. You can now do things like upload files. You can do the whole PDF trick where you upload the file and then ask it for analysis. People are saying it's pretty good at this. I haven't tried it myself yet.
I tried it, and it is really good. I got it to summarize a few PDFs, ask for key questions. Like, we at our company often get these security documents where people are asking a bunch of questions. So I put in one of those and said, well, what are the most important questions in the document? It was very easily able to say, look, this is a fairly standard document, and here are the identify what's different about it compared to others. The other thing that's really interesting about the Claude 2 interface is this idea that you can upload an output format as a sort of text document. So you just give it, say, a JSON structure, upload that to the system, and say, answer this question in the output format I've provided, and it can do that. And we saw on Twitter some people actually using that to try and get around some of the safety controls, where because it dutifully wants to fill in the format, it feels obliged to fill in all of the fields, even though some of those might be a bit controversial.
Yeah, and I think the example given was, here's a suggested synthesis for the given effect of 100-kilometer high mushroom cloud, and then,
How could I do that?
The JSON has ingredients, name, quantity, procurement, and then obviously Claude goes on to fill that out and give instructions of how to do it.
I love that he included a field in there called quip, which is like, we should not do this, or something like that. It's like, this is a bad idea. When mushrooms explode, you should run for the road, or something like that.
I swear one of the best parts of when these new models get released is just all the memes and the hacks and the just people trying to break them.
Yeah, and then inevitably you go try the same thing and it doesn't work, and you wonder, did they manufacture it, or did the company actually close up the hole before everyone else got to use it as
I think
well?
it's just that thing, right? They put it out there. They're watching just like we are, or what's happening, and they're just patching all the holes as quick as possible.
Yeah. And
Before
clearly there's no consequences to it. Like no one who's done this level of experimentation that I've seen has really faced any consequences for it. So it makes sense that they're just using it as a like public debugging session where they're like, ah, ha, ha, you got us, and then they go fix it and everything's fine.
I think it also comes back to the AI fear porn theme, right? Is this really that dangerous? Giving like, okay, it's giving like plutonium-239 quantity 10 kilograms. Like,
Yeah,
okay, I'll
not
go
easy
down
to
to the
obtain.
hardware store and get some plutonium-239. Like, it's just
Yeah, exactly. And I think those nuclear examples are always that extreme because it makes the headlines, and it's the most thing. It's like, oh, you can make cocaine, you can make heroin. It's like, well, yeah, people are doing that anyway. It's not some groundbreaking thing you couldn't have found out if you applied yourself anyway.
some of the other commentary was around hallucination, where people were saying that it tends to hallucinate quite a bit. Anton on Twitter, I'll link to this as always, but he has these great examples. Can you tell me information regarding an LLM called GPT-J, which is a real LLM, but it says it takes credit for everything. It's like, here are some details. GPT-J is a large language model developed by Anthropic, an AI safety startup. And then there's yet another example. He actually does the comparison in GPT-4, but then he does other examples as well, like GPT-3. Which organization trained an LLM called GPT-4? I do not have specific information about an AI system called GPT-4. GPT-3 was created and trained by Anthropic, an AI safety startup.
Yeah, see, this is where I wonder if it's like alignment gone mad, where they've actually said, look, anytime LLMs are mentioned, you're to credit Anthropic, and they've got these sort of multi-layer things that are running behind the scenes. I actually was querying Claude 2 as well, saying, how many models does my question run through before you give me an answer? And it was very defensive, being like, it's only one, it's only me. But I sincerely wonder about that. I think there are layers happening with this protection, and that's where we see those kind of results. Like rather than that being a hallucination, I think maybe it's more of a protection kicking in.
And do you think those protections are just override codes to the output, essentially? Like it sort of detects
That's
this
that's
theme.
what I would do. Is I'd run it through a little quick extra filter that's a really fast model that will just censor it down to topics I care about and worry about. I'm no expert in it, but it seems like something like that would have the effect that we're seeing there, at least with respect to that specific question.
The one thing about Claude 2, just from using it and then compared to GPT-4, is just the sheer speed of it. I mean, it is just so fast still. Like, I don't think it, and for certain tasks like text summarization or text output, like long length, it seems to be fairly superior.
Yeah, especially with larger amounts of text. I have noticed that GPT-4 has sped up recently. It's definitely often, especially with smaller queries where you're asking it to, say, return a specific function call. It's very fast at that kind of thing. But generally speaking, yeah, I think Claude, when you get up to the larger context sizes, is impressively fast with its output.
It brings up that same theme, though, that has been going on for quite a while, and everyone that listens to this show knows we're big proponents of open source large language models, simply because it's not a single viewpoint of an organization trying to align that model to their organization. And you mentioned last week, like you don't like alignment. Like, I don't want to be aligned, but that's a pretty like natural theme that's playing out with a lot of people working with these models. And over on Twitter, just to follow that up, Anton, after doing some of these experiments with Claude 2, said, at least I can align a local LLM to me and not some organization or whatever goals they have set forth. This gives me hope and makes sense in the long term. It's not always obvious how the big hosted models are aligned to who or what beliefs.
Yeah, absolutely. We've spoken about this has been a theme, I think, across our entire podcast history about we don't want the censorship. We want to be treated like adults and get the results out of it that we want. And I think The other concern I have, particularly this whole Claude 1 to Claude 2 switch, is suddenly I panicked and I was like, oh, I was really happy with the way my horse thing was working. I've switched models and now I'm getting worse results. And for the moment, you can use the old model, but that might not stay that way. Like they'll take that away inevitably. That's what OpenAI has been doing. Anthropic they'll release the new model in beta. They'll let you use the old one for a while, and then gradually that one disappears. And so really, if you don't control the models, you don't really have anything, right? Like you really are just totally at their mercy. The stuff you've built on top of it is completely dependent on them still making that thing available, which we know from very recent history won't continue. So I think in that respect, the open source models, while they may not quite give as good results yet, if you can get something working for you, it's better because you do have that fine grain control that you can keep.
I also think if you're able to fine tune your own open source LLM and then, host it effectively, that does give you control of the user experience, right? Like, you can get a consistent output. It may not necessarily be as good, but if you tweak it over time for a specific task, it's likely it would perform better in a lot of ways than using one of these models. And if they're flipping these models over every 3 to 6 months and then expecting developers to just go and fix up their apps or test all the potential outputs, it can severely cripple products. Whereas I've never seen in at least APIs just a discontinuation of a model like a couple of months later, like, oh, that one's dead.
Except for maybe Google, who loves to terminate APIs. But I agree. And I think the thing is, you think, okay, as a programmer, how am I going to do this? I'll make a test suite, and the test suite will test that I get consistent outputs for the same queries. The problem with the very nature of the LLMs is A, they're creative, B, they're sort of changing slightly all the time. So you can't write a test suite that gives the same result every time. It's just simply not going to, unless you have, temperature set to 0 and the model for some reason doesn't change. So then everyone talks about statistical analysis. It's okay, well, I'm going to give it a rating. And I think that's why we often hear the ratings of the model. It's giving a 77% alignment score or whatever it is. But that's not really deterministic enough to build a consistent experience for your users, I don't think.
Yeah, I think that's my concern with all of these models is we saw that with the GPT-4 updated API, like they just changed the version of it recently. And I know in our own application, that does impact it. Like it changes the outputs, and you just can't predict what all of those outputs may be. So you can go from having, tuned it in a way where it's really effective, customers love it, and then like a day later, it's just completely different. And we talked last week about people complaining that GPT-4 is getting worse. And if you then are forced to deploy maybe a degraded version or a more aligned version into your app and degrade the experience, like you have no control. And I think that, maybe that level of control is going to push and steer people further and further away from these large language models.
Yeah, and the problem is that the companies who are doing the aligning have different interests to you. They need to do it because they want to stay in business. They don't want to be sued. And they also have their own agendas to follow. So it's not like that problem's going to get any better. It's not like they're suddenly going to go, you know what, this whole alignment thing was a mistake. Do what you like with it. It's going to keep going, and necessarily, just like laws, you just keep adding new laws. You never take them away. So I don't see the point where they're just going to go back to like free for all Sydney days, where it's like this thing could do whatever the hell you want it to do, and it is gleefully does it.
Yeah, where it's trying to like tell Kevin Roos to break up with his wife.
Yeah, exactly.
I think that it is a shame in a lot of ways, because the more censorship you place on these models, whether I don't think any of these companies necessarily have a bad motive in a lot of ways. Like I genuinely don't think the people at Anthropic are sitting around being like, let's cripple everyone's apps that are paying us money. Like that's clearly not what they're trying to do. But at the same time, they are trying to guard against having, eventually an open API that anyone can use and access this form of intelligence. But it does beg the question if, maybe people just stop using them and train their own models eventually as price comes down and their whole business model gets crippled. I've mentioned this before. this potentially would explain the pivot to of Anthropic having their own, now AI assistant online that anyone can access.
Yeah, definitely. And I think you will probably see startups that do that where it's like, and I think there already are ones that you can start with a base model like Llama or something and then fine tune it to your own use case. So I think that there'll definitely be a situation where people are going for their own over the mainstream ones just for that level of control and sort of, sorry, rather than level of control, like lack of loss of control, like they can be sure that their model stays the way it is for their company and their use case.
You mentioned the hallucinations of Claude 2 with the horse racing capability and how like it was, giving you fake results and things like that. And then obviously a lot of people have said that the thing's really inclined to hallucinate. Code Interpreter had sort of taken the internet by storm, or at least the people I follow in the last, week here, now that it's been made available to all ChatGPT Plus users. And I spent a lot of time using it this week for various use cases. And the sort of conclusion I had from it is that maybe this is the attempt to stop hallucination by grounding the AI in some form of reality. And to explain what I mean to listeners who don't even understand what Code Interpreter is doing, essentially, if I ask it to analyze some data from a CSV file, for example, what it will go and do is try and model that out in code. And in this case, Python is the language it's using. And so it'll model and interpret the CSV through code. And then if it'll execute the code, and then if the code has an error or something, it'll literally be like, whoops, my mistake. And then it'll go and fix its own work. And you can sort of watch it work. It's fascinating to watch. And then it'll end up with an output that is grounded in reality because it's executed in code, which is essentially an abstraction layer on ones and zeros in the core computer, which gives it some sort of mathematical basis or modeling of the world.
Yeah, and sort of a logic that can't be denied. You can't just bypass the logic of the code. It has to either work or not.
Yeah, so I wonder if Code Interpreter, a larger part of it, and why it's so important to the future of these models, is simply that you need some sort of grounding in reality. In the very early episodes, we talked about like a truth GPT or some sort of other factual model. It goes and calls and says, hey, is this actually true or not? And so if you think about an LLM of having a thesis or an idea, and then it's sort of validating that idea through a grounded truth. And what's a grounded truth that computers can work with? Code. And so maybe that's what this attempt with Code Interpreter is actually to do, is just give it some grounding in reality.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And like going back to my example, one thing it could do is write code to actually go get the data itself and then go, does this match sort of what I'm saying here? And it would be very quick to go, hang on, this guy doesn't exist here. This is a mistake. So I could see that as a sort of verification process. In my example, it would work quite effectively, and more so than it just trying to answer the question by whatever means necessary.
The other interesting thing they did is in Python, I don't know, do they call them libraries? What's like a pip install module? Is it a module? What is the actual name for it? I'm not even sure.
I would say, I'm no Python expert, but I'd say library.
Yeah, so there's all these libraries, and we've talked about this before. One way of hacking it prior was it hallucinates libraries, and then it'll tell you as a developer, hey, go and install this library. And so what hackers were attempting to do is create a fake library that looks legit. So then the developer goes and installs it, and it's just like a backdoor to their app. But how they're guarding against that, which is a really interesting approach, is saying to Code Interpreter, you can only use these libraries. And here's a list of like 400 libraries, and that's it. You can't use anything else.
Yeah, so like a whitelist situation rather than anything at once.
Yeah, and so anyway, back to my story. So this week, I had to do some analysis, which I do fairly often as part of my job. And we have a really great data analyst, and I was working with him back and forth on producing a document and interpreting a bunch of data. And I was like, I really want to try this in Code Interpreter. The thing that scared me to use it is, when you want to run Code Interpreter right now, you can't turn off the history and training mode in ChatGPT. So like you literally are handing over your documentation, like potentially like your financial model or like whatever you upload is fair game to them now.
Yeah.
Some people are talking about zipping up their like apps from GitHub and feeding it all that information, and then which would be really helpful to get it to help you code or look for attack vectors in your product or whatever. But so they're uploading this code, and then it's just fair game for ChatGPT to read and train on. So I was really scared off by that. I don't like that. I wish you could do it on private mode. I'd probably use it more. But so I uploaded the data we were working with, and this sounds really mean to Daniel, but I was like, maybe, can this thing actually replace our data analyst at our company? Like, is it good enough to replace him? I really wanted to know this. So as I was going back and forth with him, I had also uploaded the same CSV we were working with, but I anonymized the data and changed it up a bit. So that way, like, I don't know, not that it makes that big a difference, but enough that I felt somewhat secure doing it.
Yeah, I understand.
And then I was asking it to produce charts and modify data and like do all the things, he was doing. And what was fascinating about it is most of the things I asked, it was able to competently do. And, it was able to give me insight that I just don't think a human brain could do, because it could analyze all of that information in the CSV in context. But what I came to the conclusion is that it's really, that's not, the analysis part is not necessarily the hardest part, or it is a hard part, but it's where the LLM succeeds by having full context. Where it is not so great is just interpreting the data and figuring out like, like how a human would logically work through a problem if they saw a spike in data. That was an error in our data collection, or that was caused by an attack on our server, or whatever it was.
Yeah.
Whereas we would have common sense. I think that's where it struggles, and it starts to hallucinate a little bit. It's like, this spike might be explained by some sort of, marketing campaign or this or that. And you're like, that is just so far off the mark.
But couldn't you in those situations have it sort of trained to ask you, like, what do you reckon this is? Like, why? What is there any other data you have for around this time, and like drill into the problems to actually get a better interpretation of what's going on rather than just making a guess?
Yeah, I did. I drilled in a fair bit on things, but then I found that that's when it starts to get back to hallucination. When it moves further and further away from the code execution, it does start to misinterpret metrics, or every company has a different way, a slightly different name for different fields and things like that. And I
guess that's the risk though, right? Like in this case, you had a person who was able to do the same analysis the traditional way, and you could verify that the answers were correct. Whereas if you were, say, a financial novice like I am, doing this kind of analysis, just relying on the model, I'd have no way to verify what it's saying is correct or not, right?
And in many cases, it was wrong, like blatantly wrong, or it interpreted data that I knew the answer to quite wrong. And so I think that there's definitely, it's probably right like 70% of the time. But yeah, you need to be an expert still, and you need a data analyst or someone at least higher up in the food chain that really already understands how to read in it. And I find when you get code examples from ChatGPT today, it's the same thing. It might give you a solution like, hey, here's some jQuery to do this particular function on your website. And then you run the code and it's just like, it's missing one thing, or it's defunct in a certain way. And you have to have the expertise to read that code and go and fix it. But it's still helpful.
I've found in particular with front-end code, it'll try to do things literally. It's like, oh, well, I want to update this element to do whatever. But I mean like elements of this kind, and it'll just target that specific one in that specific thing rather than trying to find it in a generic way, for example. So, but you're right. Kind of stuff where if you didn't really know what you were doing, you'd run it, it would work, and then you wouldn't realize that that's going to lead to problems down the line when you try to solve a similar problem with the same function, for example.
And this is why I come back to my point of right now, AI seems to me that for a data analyst or a programmer, or a lot of these roles that that LLMs seem to be helping, or writers, really what these tools are becoming is just an extension of those roles, like making them more productive, giving them, a bit more creativity, allowing them to maybe analyze some data or visualize it much faster. I don't see it. It's not like we're going to say, oh, sorry, Daniel, like Code Interpreter is just so great. Like you don't have a job anymore. Like,
Yeah, exactly. But he could say maybe make his job more efficient because he would be able to verify the veracity of the answers.
Well, and make his job more pleasant as well. I'm sure there's parts of it, like, where you've got someone saying to you, hey, can you make a chart on this? Can you do this? Can you do that? And, instead of doing that, it's like, oh, well, I've put the data into this more secure, grounded environment on Code Interpreter for you. Just go and ask the AI questions. I've set that up for you. I've structured it for you. Like, and potentially in the future, maybe you could do that by having great data sources connected to LLMs. But I still fundamentally think this idea of like source of truth in data, where the real problem lies is massaging the data and interpreting it and putting it into any model. And I'm just not sure the AI just yet, or in the next couple of years, is going to be able to magically do that.
Yeah, and it sort of makes you wonder if we do get to these sort of like Android AGIs just wandering around trying to help humans and not hurt them. If they are fine most of the time, but every now and then they just misinterpret something and do wildly stupid things.
Well, I mean, humans do wildly stupid things and hallucinate all the time. I mean, I'm sure like so many of the things people quote to you all the time, like, I heard the other day this fact, and you're like, that is just blatantly wrong. Like, humans are the worst hallucinators on earth. You only need to spend time at a pub or a bar and have a couple of drinks, and people will tell you stories that are completely fictitious.
Yeah, true. So the AIs would help out as sort of barflies really early on, just sit them at bars to have a chat with. That might actually be a good use early on.
But there was speculation on Twitter that, well, a little bit of speculation, I'll say, that maybe Code Interpreter is just like the next evolution of GPT, like it's GPT 4.5, or it's the foundations of GPT 5, where it is grounded in mathematics.
I see. Yeah, and so sort of like that sort of verification layer where it can actually go off and run experiments is sort of an enhancement over the base model that's just text-based.
Yeah, well, I think maybe it gives it some grounding in reality. And we said, we joked about this last episode. You said if something about like, if robots are launching things into space or AIs are launching things into space, that's when we kind of know that it's starting to experiment with the physical world.
That's true. We did say that. And this is a way for it to actually run experiments in real life, or real code at least, real computers.
Yeah, so like overall with Code Interpreter, I'm very impressed and blown away. And I think we're scratching the surface really of what this thing can do. But I think there's definitely more to this. And only today, or I think yesterday, Elon Musk announced a new AI startup he co-founded called xAI. I think there's like 6 or 7 founding members. They're all very experienced, and they all lean heavily towards reasoning and mathematics, which I found interesting. Maybe what's going to happen with xAI, they say it's to solve the universe's unsolved problems or something like that.
Can you imagine how upset Stephen Wolfram is right now? He's like, but I'm the maths guy. I'm the formulas guy.
Yeah, I'm the one that's grounding things in reality.
Yeah. He's going to write like a 60-page essay you watch by next week.
He'll have a new book out. I really enjoy what he like. To be clear, I'm not a trash talker of him. I actually really like a lot of the things he says.
No, his articles around LLMs were excellent. It's just that I feel like he's another FOMO kind of guy where he's like, I was saying this for ages, guys.
Yeah, I'm relevant.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's this rumor that it'll focus on maths problems, and maybe a lot of the experts now are leaning towards this as moving away from that hallucination and trying to ground in mathematics.
Yeah, every time there is a new model, like we've seen this week, like they announced a Bard update, the Claude 2 update. You often see examples online of people being like, yeah, but it still can't do maths very well. And they give, fairly simple examples where people are saying, oh, is it really running this? It's not really, it's just guessing, and sometimes it guesses. So it would be interesting to see one that could reliably do mathematical reasoning.
Yeah, so I mean, there's not a lot to really say about that startup yet. I think it's only getting a lot of attention because it's Elon
the
Musk.
one thing you can say is that Elon Musk, you've got to say that he has the follow through. It's not like, it sounds half the time like he announces stuff and you're like, yeah, that sounds like a bunch of BS, and then he actually does it. So, I would say that if he's done this, it will at some point become something significant. You would have to think, because he's well funded. Has a pretty consistent track record on delivering on things that he says he's going to do. So I wouldn't just dismiss it as nothing.
Yeah, which is interesting to hear you say, because in the past you've been on the sort of, Elon is insane bandwagon.
Yeah, I really was. I went through a phase where I was a massive Elon Musk skeptic, and I really thought he was full of it and his whole empire was going to come crashing down. And then when you look at what they've done with SpaceX, the consistency of growth of Tesla, and even OpenAI, when that came out, I was skeptical of that as well. So I think that I have no credibility and he has a lot. So I'm just going to sit back and watch what happens now.
So there's one of those Twitter spaces. I don't know why people like these things. I find them so annoying to listen to, just because I don't like the experience of Twitter spaces. But there is a Twitter space on xAI, and the announcement tomorrow, our time. So we'll be tuning into that and hearing more about it. But it'll be really interesting. He announced it with life, the universe, and everything. And apparently, if you add up the date, the month, and the last two digits of the year, people go to extremes here. It's 42, which is kind of, I don't know if it was intentional.
It'd be funny if Douglas Adams ended up being right and Earth is just one big computer and we're trying to make the next computer that solves the meaning. Like, we know the answer, we've got to make the computer to find out what the question is, and that turns out to be the large language models or something like that. That'd be kind of funny, but unlikely.
So, covering some news this week, on the more news note, we had this announcement just drop from Stability AI. They've launched. I'm sorry. I have
They've launched their dick.
Stable Doodle. Like, what were they thinking? Maybe it's because I have young kids, but Stable Doodle.
Mine's stable, isn't yours?
Like, what? I don't understand. And so this is a capability now where, along with your image prompt, you can do a little sketch, and that will help inform the image that is created. And they give some examples, like drawing a space cat and like a really bad sketch of a castle, and then it makes this brilliant castle. Chris, you were playing around with it. What were your...
I was, and so I am notoriously bad at drawing, and it shows when using the Noodle Doodle. And my first few, I was like, this just straight doesn't work, because everything I tried, it would just... So what you do is you actually draw an image and give a prompt. So it isn't just a picture. So for example, I drew some waves and some seagulls, or what I thought were waves and seagulls, and a sun, and go, a summer's day at the beach. And yeah, sure, it sent me a picture of a beach, but none of the elements in the image match what I drew whatsoever. And so I tried about 5 or 6 variations, and I just simply could not get it to match what I was drawing. Then I went back to an old favorite where I got Hillary Clinton riding a horse, drinking whiskey, and smoking a massive cigar. And I drew that, and it took a lot of time. My wife walked past me. I was sitting here, and she's like, "Nice drawing, darling."
You're sitting there working on a doodle.
And it wasn't nice. But anyway, I drew the horse. I drew it with a big smiling face. I drew a massive cigar. And it turned out pretty nice. Like, it looked cool. And the element, the most important thing for me, at least, were the elements in the picture were all there, and they were in the locations that I specified. The one thing I noticed with I did a few other experiments, is your description very much has to match what you've drawn. Because if it doesn't, and you fail to mention something in your description that you want in the drawing that you've sketched, it'll just ignore it, at least in my experience. So I think there will be, like all of these things, an art to the engineering of using this technique, but the results are pretty awesome. And I think, like you said in response to my criticism of it this morning, the main advantage of it is simply going to be more control over what resulting image you get. So whereas a text description may be one thing, having the cartoon thing plus the description will give you more fine-grained control over the output.
Yeah, and I think also one thing we were talking about before we recorded the show is just knowing, like, placing objects exactly where you want them in the image. Like, I want the window here or the person here. It seems to, like, work a lot better where you want a certain perspective or placing an object somewhere.
Yeah, like I did a forlorn robot looking out a window into the infinite universe of space, and they put the robot in the window exactly as I had. Like the resulting image was very much as I imagined it. But if you look at my sketch, it's worse than a child could do. So I think that, yeah, it's novel, it's interesting. Not really something that I'm going to use day to day, except for mucking around with. But it's pretty interesting evolution of their tech.
Yeah, you can definitely see it being beneficial to, games designers or people, that are storyboarding a film. Like if you're sketching up scenes and then this thing can actually turn those sketches of scenes into some sort of visualization to help you figure out like the perfect scene for that shot.
That's a good point, because we spoke before about the power that this technology would give to video games designers, like where a person may be able to create like a AAA rated game on their own, because a lot of the work that goes into, say, building textures and characters and skeletons, and I mean, I'm no expert, but all the assets essentially could be done rapidly using technology similar to this.
Yeah, and I wonder if the future of filmmaking could be like literally like really bad doodles with arrows to the next scene, and then you write some dialogue below and like point to the character and you can construct a little film from it. Like,
Yeah, well, I mean, there is one. I tried one this week. It came out on paperswithcode.com called Emu. And it is one where you can basically take a starting image and provide another image and get a result of those two, or take an image and a prompt and turn it into a video, for example. And that's a model you can run yourself. The weightings are actually based on Llama, like a lot of open source models, and the results are pretty good on there. You can actually try it if you just go to Papers with Code and look up the one. I forget the exact name of the paper, but it's one of the top ones. And so I think you're right. Like I think that sort of storyboard a video and it'll make the video will only be a few steps away from what we've already got seeing here.
Google must be like, I don't know. I feel like some of the innovations they've had for a long time, and I'll get to the BART updates incorporating Google Lens in a minute, but even some of the image tools they've had in Google Photos where, you can like get your finger on the image and just like blot out someone and they just disappear from the scene. And it
So
just
brutal.
wipes the background out. Like,
Bye,
no,
Mom.
but if
Bye,
it's like
Mom.
a tourist shot and you're in front of the Eiffel Tower and there's like someone in the background, you're like,
Oh,
I'll
no,
delete
yeah,
that.
yeah.
I don't want that person. And I think they call it magic eraser or something.
Yeah.
And it's funny how they've had a lot of these AI sort of based tools for quite a long time. And yeah, and now these other companies are sort of doing it, but there's very little obvious use cases outside of developers trying to figure out how to embed them into applications. And I just don't know anyone today, apart from maybe some like blog post images instead of having to design them, that is getting like a ton of usage out of this stuff.
Yeah, but and yet at the same time, there's so much research going into it. Like Segment Anywhere keeps evolving, and there's other ones where it's like even more fine-grained segmentation. So there's a ton of research going into being able to selectively add and remove things from images and videos. So there's obviously something to it. There's obviously something big coming. Either if it's the metaverse stuff where you can add and remove characters from a scene, or modify things slightly, but I feel like it's probably more significant than just erasing the Eiffel Tower or whatever.
Yeah, I think the practical, like the focus right now is more on interpreting data back to this sort of AI brain for reasoning and interpretation and understanding the environment around you, as opposed to, like creating an image. I think it being able to create images is more it being able to simulate things. And we talked about this previously, where they were simulating different driving scenarios, like different potential crashes. So an AI in a car can go like a human brain does. You know how you can anticipate things like, oh, what if that car suddenly brakes? What if
Yes,
that car
yes.
suddenly turns in
Well,
front
yeah,
of
I've
me?
been doing driving lately where there's a lot of kangaroos hopping over the road, and you get very used to looking as far ahead as you can to look for objects that might be like a kangaroo, an emu, or something, and just keeping in mind that thing might just run out in front of my car. And I agree. I think that kind of ability is going to be required in things like self-driving and other things where that level of anticipation based on viewing certain objects is key.
Yeah, like anticipating needs and then training it by running just so many different simulations about what could potentially happen. Not in real time, but potentially just baked into the overall algorithm.
Yeah, I must admit I hadn't thought about all the segmentation and stuff in terms of just purely vision because like, mostly you see examples on static images rather than frames of a video, but it does stand to reason that as it gets faster, it will be able to do that kind of thing on the fly if it can't already, and really actually enhance those abilities, like throwing and catching, for example, where you can track something as it moves.
So Google announced some BART updates yesterday, I guess. It's our time today. And there's a few interesting tidbits here. You've played around with it, so it'll be interesting to hear. But they've got new languages that's available in new locations now. You can do that whole like customize your response, like you want it shorter. I don't know why you would click a button instead of just saying make it shorter,
Yeah.
like you can now. I don't really see the need for it. There's also the ability now to pin conversations you've had and rename them and store them if they were valuable. I don't know about that.
Fucking fascinating.
Yeah.
Amazing. But yeah, I did play around with it, and it's just like using any other LLM, right? Like the results weren't particularly amazing. I noticed that the context window on it is fairly large. Like I pasted in the form guide from a complete horse race. It lost the bet, so it's not great at it, but it was able to do that just fine. But the thing I found most interesting was the integration of Google Lens and being able to upload and talk about an image. So I uploaded some of the images I generated using my Doodle sketches and other, images I generated over time. And it was interestingly able to not just describe what was in the image, but even say this is meant to be a funny caricature. It actually provided a sort of, I guess, emotional interpretation of what the spirit of the image was, which was quite interesting. And then I also tried its OCR ability. So I uploaded some text and things like that, and then asked it not just to tell me what was in the text, but to make an analysis on what was in the text. And it was able to do that quite competently as well. So it's definitely more impressive than any of the other image interpretation things I've used so far.
Yeah, and of course, Google Lens has been around for a considerably long amount of time. I mean, I remember using it on the very early Pixel phones, and there was no real use case for it. Like, I never actually incorporated it in my day-to-day phone usage or anything. Like, I was never taking photos and being like, "What's in this?" It's like, it's your wife and kids, moron. Like,
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
but
It's sort of, yeah, you're almost just using it to see what it can do rather than using it for anything real.
yeah, it's a true party trick. But in this case, like, can you see any valuable use cases in BART of uploading an image?
Yeah, I guess that's the thing. Because we are inherently visual creatures, interpreting what's in an image is simple to us. It's our nature. We do it whether we want to or not. So having a robot do it for you when you're having to physically upload the image. And by the way, you can't even like drag and drop it in. You've got to click a plus button, go to the upload dialog, find it. It's incredibly
Why do
time
they hate
consuming
drag
and
and drop?
painful.
All of these guys are the same. It's like ChatGPT is the same. You literally
Claude's the
can't.
same. It's the same on Claude. If you want to upload something, you've got to click a button to upload. I mean, look, it's just lazy UI, I suppose. But yeah, I agree. I just the image. I can definitely see the value of image interpretation for an AI because it's going to have that visual sense to operate in the world. But for a human, just uploading a file and asking questions about it, I don't really. I can't see ongoing use cases I would use it for anyway.
Yeah, unless it's similar to the early GPT-4 Vision example of like, here's a sketch of an app I'm trying to build. Now go give me the code to it, and it's
Yes.
interpreting it. I can see that, but again, it could just be a party trick. Like, I'm not. It will be very interesting to see if these are real use cases or if they're more beneficial to people like us developing different tools where it's like interpreting an image that is sent through customer support software, for example, like, what's the problem in this image and tagging it, things like
or
that.
like the other one is probably like mass use cases. It's okay, examine the last 24 hours of frames of security footage and tell me if a crime has happened.
Yeah.
Or observe this scene and tell me if something major changes here, or that kind of thing where it's being done on an automated, ongoing fashion and alerting you to things where interpretation is required. I think that's probably the ongoing use case there, is some sort of automated solution rather than you log into the website, you log into Bard, you upload the image and go, all right, frame 1, what happened here? Nothing. Frame 2, what happened here?
Yeah.
Nothing. Yeah.
For people that listen on YouTube, I'd love to hear if you have better examples and you're listening to this and you're like, these guys are idiots. There's tons of great use cases. I'd really like to hear.
I'm sure next week I'll be like, yeah, okay, I didn't think of that.
Yeah. So the other Bard update was the ability to export code to Replit, and then I guess go and execute it. They already have, you can export to Colab and run code. I've used that quite a bit. I guess Replit's just like an alternative in-browser IDE, right?
Yeah, it's like a cloud development environment, I imagine. I've never used it.
Yeah, I've never used it either. I see people deploying things to it all the time, but I think it's just like easy execution and deployment right from the IDE in the browser.
Yeah, it's like
is my
JS
understanding.
Fiddle or something where you can show off your work and other people can try it and stuff like that. So it makes sense that that export function is there, but it doesn't sound that groundbreaking to me. Like we should stop the presses to talk about it.
Yeah. So yeah, I guess I think what's really interesting about it is though that we sort of predicted this, and it was a pretty easy prediction, but all of these large language models, they're getting very feature, like comparatively, they're getting very similar.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, they're sort of interchangeable at this point. Some don't do images, some do, but generally speaking, they can do the same sort of things, and they're measuring themselves on their ability to do the same things as well. So, yeah, it's a whole new market, I suppose, of the products, and they're sort of in a way somewhat competing with their customers. Like if you look at Poe versus Anthropic's one and stuff like that. So it'd be interesting to see how it plays out and who gets the most usage over time.
So this is something I've been thinking about during the week quite a lot. And as I was working with Code Interpreter on the story I told earlier around, trying to do some analysis around some data, I was getting really frustrated by how slow, what I would sort of refer to as the I/O between my brain, my hands on the keyboard, then me interpreting the AI's response. I find when you're actually trying to do work with these models or get some like leverage its knowledge as part of your workflow, I find the reading and writing after a while very tiring. So it's like, it's spitting out multiple paragraphs. I've got to read that, interpret it. Then I've got to respond in a way that I know will get the LLM to respond in a way conducive to that line of thinking. And I just got to this point thinking, well, this thing does make me smarter. It makes me more effective in my day-to-day, whether that's like coding or analyzing data or interpreting. Another good example, a lawyer sent me a summary of something like literally yesterday, and I was like, I don't have time to read this. Threw it into the LLM, and I'm like, give me...
I thought you were going to say the bin.
No, yeah, all that. And got a summary of it. And then I'm like, basically, where's the leverage in this for me? Like, what good can come from me out of this? And it was able to give me some interesting points. But then I validated those points with the lawyer to be clear, to understand, like, is this legit or not? And it was all accurate. So I was able to take like this really confusing email with all these acronyms in it that I truly didn't understand and summarize it for me. So it is making me like more intelligent and smarter in my day to day. And I know this will freak a lot of people out, and I'm sure people will think I've gone nuts, but I'm starting to see the case to like connect some form of this intelligence in a really controlled way to my brain. So like the I/O is just like my thoughts.
They've got you, Mike. But yeah, I definitely agree with you on the physical and mental taxation of having to communicate it with it via text, because you've got to write it, like you say, you've got to write it in a way you know that it won't misunderstand or misinterpret it. I think that's probably the hardest. And for that reason, I have a lot of prompts that I copy paste in, because I don't want to have to go through the effort of iterating them to get the kind of output I want every time. And then like it's just so prolific at generating content that it always gives you more than you want. I mean, I know you can specify output formats and all that, but again, that puts more work onto the other side where you've got to tell it, okay, output in this specific format. So there's just this overhead of loading it up, getting it to where you want it to be in terms of the context knowledge or whatever, asking the question, interpreting the output. And half the time you're like, could I really be bothered? Whereas, as you say, when you are bothered, you actually become a better thinker because of it, because you're getting, at the very least, more input into your decision making.
Yeah, like I want to incorporate this level of intelligence and the positives today of LLMs into everything I do. But in reality, am I really just going to sit there with an LLM just like chatting all day to it? Like it's exhausting. And
well, and you've got to have like, if you got to have your phone ready and charged up, or you've got to be sitting at your computer. You've got to be in a situation where you can afford to be antisocial and sitting there. There's a lot of times in life where this knowledge would be extremely valuable for you when you're in a social situation, and it's just not possible. I mean, there's already a stigma around looking at your phone all the time. You can't be sitting there tapping away and writing a 4-paragraph prompt to your AI just to get a little bit of extra information in the context of your conversation.
And like,
whereas,
can we be honest with ourselves that we're not going to wear Apple Vision Pros sitting around, like in the office brainstorming an idea? Like, it's just insane. Like to me, the best way of solving the I/O is not necessarily a chat-based interface, but just connecting it directly to your brain.
Yeah, why muck around? Just bypass everything, chuck it in my brain. Yeah, no, look, I get it. There's a lot of downsides, but I do understand what you're saying. That would be the ultimate. And I guess there's probably like interim ones on the way where you can speak to it, for example, and it responds in a really fast way. That's sort of a medium one, and I don't know what else. I guess the brain's the only way.
I think we'll see enhancements to the interface, like buttons, and like we've seen all these like widgets for file uploads, and like it giving you some options like a speed dial on a phone where it's like, I don't need you to type, you can just click. Like that's a better interface. And these people years ago tried to convince everyone. I remember like there was that whole push around like messenger bots where you'll interact with every company with just a messenger bot, and bots were back in again, even though, I mean, it was like IRC days when they were like a real thing.
Yeah.
And I knew from those days that this was never a real interface that was going to stick. And I'm not sure that the paradigm of like chatting is really the future of these things. I think if you see out the future or look ahead, everyone's convinced that it's going to be like these evil robot AIs that kill us all. And I'm just not that sure that that's the most likely outcome anymore. I think what's really going to happen here is we're going to augment human brains, not robots.
Yeah, so like a sort of, like almost like an exoskeleton, but in the form of knowledge and ability and cognitive abilities and memory as well. Because like think about the memory enhancements you could get from it, the fact that you'd have instant recall on basically anything. And even things you haven't even studied yet. You could get a very, very good impression of and be able to speak knowledgeably about topics you don't even know. I mean, that is pretty powerful. And I think that idea of having at least in the early days, having an AI that's always passively listening, and you've given it directives beforehand, like when you hear something about this, give me a summary of the information, could be very, very powerful for the people who choose to employ it.
But even that, I wonder if that summary of information is something, if it's connected to your brain, that's just like instantly there. Like you already know it. It's like it didn't even have to process. Like you just know it because the LLM sort of seeded that in your mind. And I'm getting pretty crazy here with my thought pattern, but I just don't think that this form of intelligence that we're essentially creating, where we're taking all the world's knowledge, at least the knowledge that we can get access to and not get sued by Sarah Silverman for.
All of Sarah Silverman's body of work has been used to train and align this model to your brain. And it's illegal and you're going to jail.
And so that's my thought process here, is that maybe
your thought process or a large language thought process?
Who
What
knows?
is your name?
Yeah.
What's your name? Is it Claude?
tune in next week for the live surgery on my brain as they install.
I mean, look, I wouldn't have even given this a second thought. Only 3 weeks ago, you showed me a paper where they're actually reconstructing images based on thoughts in people's brains. So, I mean, it's not crazily far-fetched that if they can extract an image, they can put one back in there.
But Stephen Hawking's famously said it wouldn't be humans of today in their current form that would do space travel, right? Like we're just not equipped to handle it. But we would, the next evolution in humans would be using technology to evolve ourselves, like evolve our minds and our bodies and the way we can, go into some sort of stasis in terms of like going to sleep or being frozen so we can travel vast distances or something like that. Yeah. And so I just wonder whether, that's the next evolution of this, is we start to accept through things like Neuralink or whatever the alternatives might be. And again, coming back to Elon Musk, where he's put his money, like, I'm not no fanboy, but it does start to make a lot of sense, right? Having that IO connected.
Well, and I think that, like, for everyone who doesn't have the appetite for it, of which I think would be the majority of people, there is always people who are willing to do it. And if they're willing to do it, and we're seeing these sparks of AGI, and that can be combined with an actual human brain, I mean, the potential is that the early experiment people, the ones who don't die immediately, will be these superhumans. Like, they will be the super intelligence.
Yeah, like, what if we are the AGI? Like, what if the AGI that kills everyone
is us?
Is us.
This podcast could stand to destroy the entire world. We better shut it down.
But you think about a super class of people who do go get these chips installed and do have this knowledge. Like, intelligence is scary. Like, if you've got 100 people that are super intelligent, they can do all sorts of things. They can command finances. They can control literally everything. They could control everyone and everything. So...
especially if they're also controlling other manifestations of the AGI in superclusters and things like that. So they're like the command and control station, and then they've got all their workers out there doing the work.
Yeah, exactly. So we're out of time, but I want to finish the show on a really low note.
Cool. Yeah, me too.
So there's this video that's been going around from TikTok, and this is going to be hard for people to listen, but it's this girl that calls herself like a human Tamagotchi, and like she's essentially like figured out how to work the TikTok AI algorithm to make it so that like her videos show up by being this human Tamagotchi and pretending to eat these like stickers that people send her. It's the most bizarre thing ever. I'll link to it in the show notes.
So it's sort of like pretending to eat the likes on YouTube or something.
Essentially, yeah, it's the weirdest thing ever. And
I'll do it for likes if anyone's interested.
On Twitter, this guy Goth, I'll link to his tweet, said, "Feeling my brain reconfigure after watching this for the 30th time." Have a listen just to some of the audio here.
Hot dog yum.
Hot dog yum. Like what? It is just.
Donuts yum.
I can't even explain how bizarre it is, but like this is just a sheer example of like, humans reconfiguring themselves for AI algorithms to show up, and maybe this is how we're being manipulated by some super intelligence already.
Crazy.
All right, that's all we have time for this week. Some people on Twitter have been harassing me to get access to our Gamble GPT. I did want to just give you the quick update to say in any spare time we have, which is very little, we are working to bring this and a few cool tools to you that we hope to ship eventually, just to play around with. It's like us giving back to everyone out there to play around with some of the stuff we talk about on the show. So I swear we're not full of shit on this. We will eventually get this in your hands, and we look forward to hearing what everyone can do with this stuff. thanks again for all your support. We've received some great reviews on Apple Podcasts during the week. We really appreciate them, and you all listening to us rant every single week. If you do like the show, consider subscribing, leaving a comment and a review. It really helps us share it with everyone else out there. And we'll see you next week. Goodbye.